Chapter 38 The Legend of Sir Fate. Daniel tried some of the fruit from the Queen's platter, and Fate tasted the venison. It passed his test, and he took a larger bite before leaping to his feet to begin his story. He slowly spread his hands theatrically. Listen close, and you will hear of treasures far and dangers near. Daniel smirked. The Queen squealed and applauded enthusiastically. Fate began pacing as he told his story. It began on a sweet summer's morn. All was well with the world, but for a single spot of darkness. It moved through the air with a black purpose. At its heart, an evil wizard possessed of a power never before seen on this earth. His goal that day? To steal away the beautiful Princess Madison. With his prize within grasp, I rode forth on my white stallion. "Oh, this is getting good," said Madison in Daniel's ear. Daniel rolled his eyes. With my squire on his donkey at my side, we charged the evil wizard. He launched a bolt of lightning. It landed at our feet, halting our attack. He let fly another bolt aimed straight for my chest. It was about to end my long and fascinating life, but my squire was quick. He leapt from his donkey, shouting my life for my master. The lightning struck my brave squire and blocked the attack. He paid with his life. I charged the wizard, and he fled, leaving the fair Madison behind. She rushed to her brother, weeping. "Fear not, fair Madison," I said, "for I have the elixir of life." I withdrew the bottle from my traveling cloak and poured into the mouth of my lifeless squire. He opened his eyes and leapt to his feet. Greatly relieved to be alive again, he cried out, "I am alive again, thanks to your resourcefulness, master." But I reminded him of the mystic's warning. "A mystic," the Queen whispered. "Yes, a mystic. Before I set out on a dangerous journey, I always consult Natalie, the seer. She foretold of 5 terrible dangers. The wizard was but the first. We bid adieu to the fair Madison and pursued the wizard into the dark forest. Immediately we were set upon by a great beast, a bear so large that it shook the very ground on which we trod. My squire trembled, but I said, "Fear not. We carry the sacred shield of the pharaohs." Daniel caught Fate's eye and mouthed a silent, "What?" But the Queen's focus on Fate never wavered. Fate winked at Daniel and continued, "My squire handed me the polished silver shield. I expertly used it to send a bright flash of sunlight into the beast's eyes, blinding him from what was to come. I traded the shield for my sword and charged. The bear heard my approach but saw nothing. He struck out a massive paw tipped with razor-sharp claws. His blow took my steed, killing the poor thing instantly. I leapt off before it fell and circled the beast on foot. Its blindness was only temporary. Its sight soon returned, and it saw the madness in my eyes at the loss of my stallion. The ferocity of my gaze was too much for it. It yielded the field of battle and fled into the forest. The squire was vexed by my grief and tore at his cloak. "Take my donkey, master. I can walk," he cried. I thanked him, but refused. A donkey is no mount for a knight of my stature. Daniel rolled his eyes, but the Queen applauded and squealed, "Did you see the wizard again?" Fate cocked his head and winked. "We did, but in the guise of a great serpent. He accosted us in a meadow. Before we could act, he had swallowed the donkey whole. I drew my sword and sliced at its belly, releasing my squire's beloved mount, alive and well. The wizard returned to his human form and staggered away to heal the great gaping wound. We attempted pursuit, but were suddenly surrounded by a band of thieves. Their outward appearance belied their true form. To the untrained eye, they were common bushy-tailed forest creatures. But I knew them for what they were. I knew them by their many names. They were the unseelie fae. "Fairies?" muttered Daniel. "All know well that the seelie are helpful and friendly, But these thieves were the unseelie, and they were the greatest danger we had yet faced. "I've seen them! I've seen them!" the Queen shouted. "Squirrels!" scoffed Daniel, almost whispering. "Yes," said Fate unperturbed, "they are well practiced at the art of disguise. But the training I received when I was a young squire allowed me to see through their deception. They circled us waiting for the perfect moment and attacked. They swarmed us and—" Fate clapped his hands together. "They vanished with all our worldly possessions. The thieves took my sword and shield. They even took the donkey. My squire was disheartened, but I encouraged him. We still have our greatest weapon. Our wits." Daniel scoffed again. "The next beast of the forest that we met was an eagle of such tremendous size that it had just brought down a great stag. He was about to feast on his kill when we happened upon him." "It is the fifth danger," cried my squire. "No," I corrected. "The eagles of this wood are benevolent creatures who always help weary travelers in need. The fifth danger is ahead of us yet." We begged the eagle for a meal, and my squire must have looked pitiful indeed, for the eagle tore off a full hind quarter and tossed it in our path. We thanked him for his generosity, and he took flight, carrying away the remainder of his prize. We built a fire and ate well that night. This is where our tale ends. For the next morning, we arrived here. Fate bowed as the Queen applauded enthusiastically. He took his seat again, winked at Daniel, and pulled away a larger piece of the venison. After the Queen had finished her applause, Daniel pointed to the pair of keys held by a red ribbon around her neck. "Those are nice keys you have." "Your Highness," she demanded. He ignored it and pressed on. "Do you collect them?" "All of the locks in the castle are antiques, expensive antiques, but a queen can afford such finer things. Gary and I," she stopped to correct herself, "the king and I have the only keys." "The quality is unmistakable, Your Grace," said Fate seriously. "Not like the modern locks that can be picked within seconds by any random thief." He winked at Daniel again. "Daniel!" Madison's voice came from Daniel's earring so low he was the only one who could hear. "Find out how she got there." Daniel cleared his throat. "Tell us again, my queen, the story we know so well about how came you to these strange lands." "Ooh, that's good, Daniel," said Madison. Fate raised his eyebrows and barely suppressed a grin. The Queen was delighted and began her story. "The king and I were at a kegger. That's a royal ball, as you well know. Anyway, the king and I were at Tanya's royal ball and we went outside to gaze at the stars. It was very romantic. We sat on the deck. That's what they call a veranda in the land of Tanya. He kissed me, and I suggested that we go down to the river for a midnight swim by the wandering tree. He said that tree gave him the creeps and we shouldn't because it looked like rain, and plus there was already thunder. I told him not to be I told him we would be fine. Halfway down the path, it started to rain. I like it when it rains, but Gary didn't like getting his precious boots wet. We ducked under the tree, but still got soaked. I removed my long white gloves and my ball gown. It was so beautiful. It was flowing white with a rose pattern near the hemline. She trailed off and stared wistfully at the ceiling behind Fate. "That sounds lovely, but—" Fate began. "But you were going to tell us how you got here," interrupted Daniel impatiently. That broke her reverie. She slammed her open palm on the table. "That's what I'm doing." She composed herself and straightened her posture. "Did you say wandering tree?" asked Fate in a steady, calm tone. "Yes," she replied firmly. "Wandering tree." She cocked her head forward slightly and shook it, as if that would make it all clear. When it didn't have the desired effect on Fate, she added, "It's the tree that leaves." "Don't they all?" muttered Daniel sarcastically. "This is a wonderful story, my queen," said Fate, hoping she missed Daniel's comment. Can you tell us the full history of the wandering tree one more time? My squire does love it so. Fine, she sighed. Once upon a time there was a tree. They called it the wandering tree because it wandered. Duh. It could only disappear in a storm, but it could come back any time. It would be gone for a few weeks or sometimes longer. If it left at night, it would always return during daylight. When it went during the day, it came back at night. Nobody could ever prove it was disappearing and reappearing because it would pretend to not be a wandering tree when people were looking at it. They only saw a normal tree, or if it was gone, they only saw a place with no tree. Nothing magical about that. Only us locals knew the truth. Most people were scared to get under it. They said it could take you with it. My uncle said a boy climbed it once. The boy said there was a black rock stuck in the trunk 20 feet up, said it was magnetic. Everybody knows magnets don't stick to rocks. Nobody believed him. Ah, said Fate, finally understanding, and that's how you got here. It wandered while you were under it. She shrugged. I guess they were right. All I know is there was a bright flash, and when we could see again, we were here. The river was still there. The wandering tree was still there, but the rain had stopped and everything else was gone. The boat dock, the trailer park, the cars, even the road was gone, and that was when we saw. She leaned forward and whispered, the dragon. It had invisible wings, and it was taking a swim in the river. I didn't even see the deer, her eyes flashed, but the dragon did. It jumped out of the water and swallowed it whole. She clapped her hands together theatrically. I think it could have eaten a horse in one bite. It was that big. It slipped back into the water, pretending it couldn't fly, or maybe it really couldn't because its wings were wet. I don't know. Its invisible wings? Asked Daniel, almost mocking. She narrowed her eyes at him. Invisible, dragon, wings. But if they were invisible... Fate cleared his throat. And that's when you built this castle? Of course. A queen needs a castle, doesn't she? I had my servants build it. She waved a dismissive hand at the mandrills, waiting as far away from her as the room allowed. They're good with bricks and rocks and things, but they can't make me a proper gown or gold jewelry. I keep explaining metal and fabric, but they're too stupid to understand. She smoothed the wrinkles in her stained silk slip. And what happened to Gary? Asked Daniel as casually as he could manage, trying to avoid another angry outburst. Oh, he came too. He's the king, of course, said the Queen, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Of course, as we all know, said Fate smoothly. And he's away on kingly business, I gather? Stupid exploring. I told him he should stay here with me and my monkeys. It's not safe out there, but he doesn't listen to me, and I can't make him listen. But you can make the monkeys listen, can't you? Said Daniel, with more than a hint of accusation. She scowled at him. Yes. They do what their queen says, or they get punished. She caught herself and softened. That's the way it's supposed to be. What a piece of work this one is, said Madison with derision. Find out more about that tree. It sounds like it was struck by lightning. Can you tell us anything more about the tree? Blurted Daniel clumsily. The tree? Who cares about the stupid tree? She composed herself and took a breath. Why don't you run along and play, Squire? Leave the adults to talk. Good, thought Daniel. He rose and excused himself. I would like to examine the rest of the pyramid. It seems different than the others. Castle! She shouted and slapped her hand down on the table again. Fate gently placed his hand on hers. Daniel, Esquire, run along now and have fun. He winked and turned his attention back to the Queen. I don't suppose there's any wine.